goes into detail of all the skills and techniques that come up in the Great British Sewing Bee every week. And we do that, as always, with Carol Elaine, our master tailor couturier. Hey, Carol, good to see you again.
Hi, Stuart. Where has the week gone to?
It's just zipped by, hasn't it? Zipped by. I bet you'll be looking forward to putting your feet up. You've had an intense week, yeah?
Very much so, yeah.
Oh.
I mean, the orders are back. People are getting out. They're wanting to dress up. So, yeah, it's a good thing. It's a good thing.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Well, we appreciate, as always, the time you give to make these videos. Our audience are loving what we do. They're loving the conversation. They're loving the time that you take in giving us the tips and how to do things in that couture way. And what they're really appreciating is the depth, because obviously the Sewing Bee can't go into that detail because they haven't got the time. So we really appreciate what you do for us. But you enjoy it, don't you? You enjoy it.
Well, very much so. You know, it's we talked about this a lot. It's solitary, you know, working at the machine and doing your draping and you and the mannequins all day. It's you know, Radio 4 is fine.
Yeah.
Podcast is fine. But no, it's great. It's a nice break for me to have some chat with some people who really want to talk about their passion as well. So it's all good.
And I like the chat where you go and you listen to people go, oh, I've done it this way. Oh, have you tried it this way? And I love all that conversation.
Exactly. Because at the end of the day, you have to make it your own.
Yes.
You know, we can share techniques and we can give advice. And when people ask for help, you step in when you can. But at the end of the day, each craftsperson has to make this technique their own.
Yeah, indeed. And what a great way to lead into our week 3, which was summer week. And the technique that came up was the shearing, but very much that. When you saw the shearing, which they did machine-wise, do you do a lot of machine, or I presume from your couture background, you would do it more hand-based?
Exactly. I think I've done a few projects a long time ago with the winding the bobbin with the elastic thread, but there's no call for it in tailoring or couture work, sometimes in costuming, but as you'll see in the video, I have a more robust approach to it. Yeah. The drawbacks of using that thread is it doesn't have the long-term life that elastic has,
right? Wider
elastic, instead of the elastic thread. And also, if it's not tied off properly at the end of each row, the beginning and the end of each row, it can unknot, it can slip away, it can come out of the stitching line, and then it's difficult to repair that.
To be fair, because the Sewing Bee is done so quick, if you were learning that technique, we didn't see any of that tying off that I can remember. I might have got that wrong, but I didn't see anyone doing that. Did you?
No, not at all. No. I didn't see anyone, making the preparations or counting the spacing of the rows. And when I think I remember Sarah saying that they could either prepare it evenly or they could freestyle. And I thought, well, that's probably a good thing because, because it's going to be tricky. And it's tricky working on a free arm machine. They're not working on a flat surface. So, their work is coming off the table, it's going up the free arm, it's going back down, and they're working with quite a big space because I'm not sure what the ratio is. Would it be 1.7 to 1 or 2 to 1, like a gathering in a curtain? But it's a big piece of fabric that has to be gathered up into
come right in. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think it was certainly a huge challenge for them, a big ask. And that dress was loaded with things that were tricky.
Wasn't it just a phenomenal task? That was why we're doing shearing, because it was in the pattern challenge to make that sheared summer dress. And it wasn't just the bust, there was the shearing on the arm, wasn't there?
Yes, so you have to gather the crown of the sleeve. And not seeing the pattern, I imagine it was probably flatter than curved. But yes, so they had to prepare that casing, get that elastic in, do the shearing on the front and back, and then I think they put an elastic line in the waist of the skirt and then join the bodice to the skirt. And if they didn't get that absolutely right, then as Esme pointed out, they could catch the elastic in the waistline, and then you wouldn't be able to get the garment on or off. It wouldn't stretch for you. So it's a lot of hurdles to get over.
Indeed, and some of them struggled with that. We'll talk about that after we've gone in depth with this technique. So it was lovely seeing the historical element again, wasn't it?
Oh, that's so nice. And they're in a very, a very historical area of cloth weaving as well. So this is one thing I'm really enjoying about the series, seeing the setting and then the added historical view of what was happening and why these garments came into vogue.
Oh, indeed, I didn't know anything about that. So that was wonderful to learn that. So let's go right from the beginning then. So we've got this idea of bringing in a large piece of fabric into something much smaller by using elastic. And then that gives that nice ruffled, pleated look, doesn't it?
Yes. So shearing it's a decorative technique using parallel lines of gathering, and it controls the fullness. So it evens out that, the big piece of fabric into the small. It evens it all out. So the fullness is under control.
And when we saw the sewing bee doing it, they were putting elastic in the bottom of the sewing machine in the bobbin. So when they sewed their straight lines, the elastic was just going to naturally pull it in. But with your technique, a more couture way, you're not putting the elastic in first. You're sewing your straight lines, and then you put the elastic in the channels, and that's what you're going to show us in the video. Yeah,
that's right. I think you have a lot more control in setting up the space and the spacing. And so you make all these channels, but you need 2 layers of fabric to do it.
Right. Yes.
Back to something. So there goes the lightness, there goes the ruffliness of, the setting up channels versus using the elastic cord in the bobbin.
So let's take a look at this first tutorial from Carol about shearing.
Shearing is formed with parallel layers, multiple layers of parallel lines, and it's a decorative way of controlling fullness in a garment. Now, when you're using elastic in the bobbin of your machine, like in the sewing bee, you're working with 1 layer of fabric, and you have your top stitch on the front face of the fabric and the elastic underneath. I'm going to show you a different way where you make channels and you feed elastic through. And this is really how I use the shearing in my own work. So I have a piece of fabric here which I have backed with a lining. I've sewn a seam to join them, and I've understitched so that the fabric lays easily over to the lining side. And then with a sharp piece of chalk, I've set up this set of parallel lines. Now I'm working at about what I would call a good 1/4 of an inch. And with a nice sharp chalk, you get a good line, which you can then follow through on the machine. So I have my multiple channels all ready, and I'm going to go away now and feed some elastic through so you can see what this type of shearing looks like when it's finished. So I've fed 4 rows of elastic using a safety pin through each of my parallel channels, and it's all finished. You can see how pretty this looks using this iridescent Dupion silk. It really brings the fabric to life. It's a little sturdier than using the elastic cord in the bobbin thread, as they did on the sewing bee. This is a little bit sturdier, and on the other hand, then it doesn't have the bounce, the ruffliness that other method has. But I like to use this method because you encase the elastic in your seam. There's no way that this can come out. I think it adds to the long-term life of the garment where the elastic thread isn't as robust. And also the bonus of using this kind of a method is that when it's all lined in, that you can't see any of your construction. The elastic is firmly encased and you have quite a neat finish. So that's just one way of creating shearing effect and controlling the volume and the fullness of the garment.
Right. See, now, to me, looking at that, that's way more straightforward than what I saw on the sewing bee.
Yes, I mean, I think you have more control. You can see that, you know, it's easier to set up. And also, once you get your elastic through, then you can tighten the tension on the elastic and you can have more gathers or less gathers.
Yeah.
And you can fashion the garment. So you could have, let's say you wanted a less tight, you know, less fullness on the bust, but more, or a tighter fit at the waist. Now you can do that. You can control the tension on it and the amount of gathers.
Yeah. And you would just change the elastic. If the elastic was too springy, you put in a lighter one, do you? Or you just adjust the fabric, the elastic?
Yeah, adjust the elastic, use a cord.
Yeah.
No. So you can try it. Samples are important in this case, but you could try all sorts of different things. You could even put in a very lightweight, thicker elastic. So, you know, you have
I just like that idea of having the control and also being able to see the end effect. Yes. And if you like it, great. If you don't, you just whiz it out, don't you?
Exactly. Yes.
Now, I understand what you were saying, that it's for this method, you've got to have a 2 layers of fabric. So it might affect the overall design. It's a summer dress. Would it really be that much of a difference, though, in weight and thickness that would disrupt the summer effect look?
No, I don't believe so, because you could choose a cotton voile as a lining, and then you could just use a very lightweight cloth. And it works very well on jersey. This shearing was beautifully on jersey, and jersey's not exactly lightweight. You know, some of them are a bit more robust. These knits. But no, you could, I think, as long as you just chose 2 very lightweight cloths that worked well together, then I don't think it's going to be any less. But it's a different texture, though, when you have the channels filled with elastic versus just that one thread on the underside. It is a lighter, so you have a choice.
Yes, I see. Yeah. So that was our first one. That was getting the shearing on the bust. They also had to do the shearing on the arm. So what we're going to do now is see you talk about that, on how to cope with the arm. That's more challenging?
Right on the shoulder, because you might have a curved sleeve. You might have the crown of your sleeve might be, you know, quite curvy. You have to create a casing. Now you could do that by adding a piece of bias, as we've done with some necklines. We faced them with a bias. But if you can use your seam allowance to make that casing, then it's just a matter of controlling it. And you'll see how that can be done with a gathering line, and also a pressing technique, where if you have a concave curve, and that has to come down and fold the casing, you can press that into a flatter curve, so that got more, you know, it's like the north bank and the south bank of a bendy river.
Yes.
It would be easier to take the north bank down to the south, but it's harder to do the south up to the north bank, if you know what I mean.
All right. Well, let's go in for part 2 then of this masterclass on how to do shearing with the arm and the shoulder. Let's take a look.
Now, in the midi dress that the contestants were making, they also had shearing on the sleeves. So using the same principle, where we need 2 layers of fabric because we're going to need channels to feed elastic through, I've got a sleeve here cut, and I've simply included the hem, finished off the raw edge with an overlock and pressed it under. And now you can fold that up, and we can set up the channels just like we did in that first exercise. Feed your elastic through, and then to finish the sleeve off, you might put a French seam in, so that the bottom of the sleeve, once it's all gathered up, and the ruffle will have a nice finished edge. The other thing I wanted to point out about sewing this dress is this idea of putting elastic into the shoulder line of the sleeve crown. And a few techniques that might help you set this up is, once you finish your raw edge, and you decide the width of your casing. In this case, I'm using less than 1/4 of an inch elastic, so I've got a 1/2 inch casing set up from the raw edge. So I've stitched a normal stitching line, and then as near the raw edge as you can get, I've set up a gather line using the long stitches of the machine. You see, so that's going to gather up. So that's that half. On this half of the sleeve, I'm going to show you how this all gets put together. So when you draw your gather line in, it makes it easy for you to press in your seam allowance that you're going to feed the elastic through. And this gather line also sets up the next step, which is to turn that edge in, and then you can press it down flat. You need a bit more gather line when you have an outward curve like this. When you get to the underarm section and the curve dips, and it's the opposite shape, what you can do is you can take it over to the press board and you can press this raw edge out, so that you see now how that's curling around. Now that's going to, when it's turned under, that's going to have no problem fitting in here. So now you can set this up, stitch very close to the edge, set up your casing, and feed your elastic through, just like we did in the other two examples.
Yeah, I completely understand that. So that round the shoulder where it goes like a valley, if you to try and adapt that more, you push it the other way and kind of stretch it.
Yeah, stretch it out. And the iron is great. That you just add a bit of steam and a bit of pressure, and that will work nicely.
Oh, brilliant. So that's 2 ways. Any other ways?
There is. I didn't have time to film this, Stuart, but can we see at home this elastic cord?
Yeah, it looks like you know when you have a face mask elastic, that tubular.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly. What I've done here, and this works quite nicely, is I've sewed this into a casing of a zigzag. So
that's brilliant. Oh, hold that a bit closer. Can you get a bit closer to your camera? Yes, I can see that now. That's a large zigzag, yeah?
It's the widest zigzag that I have on my domestic machine.
Right.
And this is why, because I use an industrial machine.
Yeah.
And so this is why I only use the type of shearing that I demonstrated.
Yeah.
But this way on a domestic machine, so I decide what kind of tension I want and then let it go.
Oh, look at that.
There's your ruffle, you see?
Oh.
So you could, if you didn't want to put the elastic cord in the bobbin, and of course you've got the white top stitching here, but if it was tone-on-tone thread,
yeah,
I wouldn't know. So this is a stronger cord, and again you have the control, because you can have as much as you want leading in, as much as you want coming out, and you can knot it, and you've got all this control over it. But it's quite pretty. It's a lovely effect, isn't it?
Hold that up horizontally for us, as if it was on the summer dress.
Like this.
Yeah, and let go, so it's now scrunched in.
Let's do
that. If you were making that summer dress like they were, how many more rows of that would you have on that sheared summer dress? Would you only have 1, or would you put another maybe... two?
You'd need quite a few. I think you'd need quite a few parallel rows of this. I think you would need 15. You know,
wow.
But it's just another method of doing that.
Yeah.
Where this would be.
It just to me looked more ruffled, so I didn't know whether you would need less lines, but you would probably still keep the same as the pattern. You would still have a lot.
I would keep the same, yes, because you need it distributed. But this would be nice for a ruffle on a cuff, or just a laid on ruffle at the bottom of a skirt or something. Anyway, Justin, as it happens, there's probably more. Let us know.
Indeed. And we've always said this, haven't we? Even on our past programs, when we were doing Sew What, and we were talking about different techniques, more often than not in sewing, it's finding the technique that you like, that suits you, or your brain can compute. And it doesn't matter if you do it one way compared to someone else doing the other way at all, does it?
No, not at all. And with that last example that we just seen, you don't have to wind a bobbin for that.
No.
Right? You use your regular thread and you sew over the cord.
Yeah.
So maybe a little bit more control, and you with this method you can tighten it up or you can loosen it. You can create more ruffle or less ruffle. So you've got a lot more control than being at the mercy of the tension of your domestic machine.
Now, because when we started watching the Sewing Bee and they said shearing, you immediately went, oh, they're going to be winding the bobbin.
Yeah.
I don't fully understand that. Are they just getting elastic and winding it round, or are they actually having to pull it and wind it and pull it? I don't understand.
So you have to wind it by hand.
Yeah.
And then when you run out, you have to wind it by hand again. So I imagine they would prepare 3 or 4 bobbins.
But I'm just trying to work out how you wind elastic round, because it moves. So
that's right. It's a stretchy textile.
So are you pulling really tight as you wind it, or do you wind it as loose as possible?
A little bit of resistance.
Right. Okay.
You have to add a little bit of tension. So you are pulling just a little bit.
Yeah. Okay.
You're not winding it loose. Yeah. But again, I think it depends on your machine and how it's going to feed through. So you kind of just have to work it out and try. I think I heard that comment. You just got to just keep fiddling with it. I think I heard. If it wasn't,
and then we saw many of them playing around with their tension, and a lot of the sewers, like poor old Steve, who hadn't done it. Well, he hadn't made a dress before, let alone do shearing. I then really felt for him, because reading a pattern is difficult. Reading a pattern, if you've never done it before, is even harder. Reading a pattern with a skill that you've never done before is even harder. I felt for him. Now I've seen your way, or several ways of doing it. God, I would have picked your way. I wouldn't have done it that way at all. So full kudos to the sewers, all 10 of them, for coping with that technique, eh?
Absolutely. And when Steve said, well, I've never done this before, I've never sewn a dress before, I thought, oh dear, how is this going to work out? But the other thing I noticed is that they all help each other in that workroom. Yeah. And that's gorgeous, isn't it?
Oh, wonderful.
So I think the who left us this week, he said,
we sadly lost Richie, didn't we?
Richie with the bow tie. He said, I've learned so much from the other sewers.
Yeah. Couldn't ask for more, could you? Before we move on to looking at the rounds, we've got one more video where you show us the different types of elastic. Look out for the long one with lots of lines.
Here we have a section of elasticated waistband. I've used this a lot in costume work, where you need that robust finish and that guarantee that the fullness is going to be controlled and it's going to last through many costume changes. The other product that we have available is this shearing elastic. It's all set up. So what I like to do, I use this occasionally, again mostly in costuming, but you'd sew your guideline. I have a chalk guideline here. You would do a couple of test samples and you would decide what the fullness is that you want. And once that's determined, then you can just put your elastic in place and pin it to anchor it. And then even it out, be aware of your guideline, and then again, you're just going to be sewing a set of parallel lines. So I'm using a longer basting stitch on this, just in case anything has to be adjusted. But this way you can get a more condensed set of parallel lines, and you see that's a different effect. And there you've got that nice ruffly bounce. You're only using one layer of fabric, so the whole job is lighter, versus setting up your rows, your channels using regular elastic. So just a couple of different ways to achieve your shearing.
That whole challenge, the pattern challenge of the sheared summer dress, was that technique was obviously the one that was going to get them. Let's talk about that now, because obviously some of them were more successful. And obviously Brogan, who had done them before, she was confident, wasn't she?
Oh, she has great composure in this process. You know, she knows what she's a very confident sewer and very, very capable.
And then we had a few others that struggled because it was a clever technique to do, and they perhaps hadn't done it before. But as I say, the end results were still impressive, weren't they? We had Marnie, who she'd said she'd never done it before, and she had that nice sort of dusty pink floral one, and she achieved a good result, didn't she?
Absolutely, beautiful results. No, I totally agree there.
And Manyi, I like Manyi. She said a little joke about choosing the gingham, and she went, "Oh, it's not cheating at all." I thought, no, it's not. Surely that was clever, wasn't it? Using gingham?
Using a patterned fabric that has parallel lines in it is exactly what you should do, because you know it's all there for you. In fact, this wasn't the sample gingham as well. Was the sample that they were given to?
Oh, I can't remember. Might have been. Oh, I don't know. I'll have a look.
I'm not sure. I maybe not. But anyway, that's clearly the way to go, especially if you're doing this technique for the first time. She was very smart to catch on to that. And it helped her.
And Christian had chosen.
No, she got an advantage, you know, in time.
Yeah.
That's right. Same reason. So yes, very, very wise choice.
Talking about fabric. Oh, it's got a bit me internet. talking about fabric choices. I suppose if you are going to make that summer dress, you do have to think of the print and what it will look like scrunched up.
Yes.
Because I felt Richie's dots perhaps didn't work that well because of the scrunching in. You lost the polka dot effect, and then they looked a bit squished and wobbly.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, I know. That's a good point that you bring out, that you're going to condense the fabric. So if you have a big bold print, then accordion down, it's you know, not going to resemble that at all. It's going to be quite squished together. On the other hand, it gives you the chance to have another effect, you know, another textural effect to it. So you've got the sleeves as one, and they're kind of gathered, but not as much. And then a really full gathering, and then less on the skirt. So you can take advantage of that in a different way with the choice of cloth. Yeah.
The standing orders for that one was poor old Steve came 10th. He was bottom and Richie 9th. So there are two at the bottom who did struggle. And then at the top, Christian 3rd, Marnie 2nd, and Brogan was obviously 1st.
Yes. I mean, we kind of watched that happen, didn't we? We thought, we saw how it was gonna, how the judging was going to work. And as you pointed out, it was people who seemed to not have as much trouble and just sailed through and ended up shouting instructions to other people in the room as well.
And that's all part of a competition, isn't it? It's like when you go on, what do they call it? Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? And that last question, it's easy when you know the answer. And Brogan, she'd made it before, or she was used to the shilling. It's just the way the luck goes. You know, a technique comes up. Brilliant.
There it is. And I think she was wearing a dress that was not dissimilar.
Yeah, I think it had on the,
But yes, and when you have to spend your time fiddling around with tension, wondering if you know, preparing for, you know, a set of straight lines, and 15 on the front, 15 on the back, you know, these aren't small tasks. You can't just whiz through them. So there's where a lot of the time would have been eaten up in the preparation. And then of course, then the nerves kick in because you're in a rush now.
Yeah.
So you can easily see if you don't have that technique in your hand, you're going to struggle.
Right. Thank you for your time with those tutorials and for going through that technique. Let's move on then for a quick review of the two final rounds. We've got the transformation round and made to measure. So remember, it was summer week, everyone. The transformation round was Which, to be fair, I've been a bit critical of this round before because of what they've had to do. This was a really good one. Hammock and turn it into an adult. Notice they said adult summer garment. They had to use either the fringing, rope, or macrame. So remember that when we come to the judging. There was some really creative tops. I felt here. Not.
Yes, I said, oh, just make a thong.
Yes.
Very creative ideas, all completely different, I thought. And I know which one was my favorite. It didn't win. I forgot where Jill came in, but I thought.
Oh, Jill didn't come very well. Yeah, she was like, out of 10, she was 8th.
But I really loved her interpretation, and the fact that she matched all that. She had two separate garments, but yet she matched it beautifully, and it was such a lovely use of cloth.
What disappointed me about Jill's, though, wasn't her work. It was Patrick. The only problem with this round this week, judges, please give us some better critiques.
Yes.
He lifted the bottom up and turned the fringing underneath, because she had these nice stripes, didn't she? And he went,
right.
Oh, it might have looked nicer without the fringing, and turned the fringing underneath. And I'm like, well, don't tell the sewers then that you've got to use fringing, rope, or macrame, because she wouldn't have chucked it on there, would she?
No, and that was the brief. So that the brief was followed. You can't penalize someone for following the brief. Yeah, and I don't think you can, which we hear a lot of times. We just didn't like that, We, the judges, we just didn't like that. We didn't like the black, on the dress. So we didn't like this, we didn't like that. But I mean, yes, that's worth a gasp or two, because that flies in the face of what they told them to do.
Indeed. And then Esme to Manyi was, I wish there was a piece of macrame on the front, even though there was loads of macrame on the back. You're like, well, clearly Esme wanted more macrame, because she was saying it all the way through, wasn't she? That's my only problem with this. The creations were lovely, and I just feel it was over. The praising was not enough for that round, because I thought the creativity with the way they used the rope and interlocked it was brilliant, but we didn't get that. We didn't get that positivity, did we?
And this challenge is about using your ingenuity, your imagination. You can be as clever as you want. The brief is wide open.
Yep.
And so the last thing you're going to do is make something the same on the front and the back, or the same side to side. You're not looking for symmetry.
Yeah.
In a task like this, where you're going to be measured by how clever you cut.
Absolutely.
And you assemble things.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think that that round wasn't recognized for what was produced.
From the teacher, from me, that's a little see me at the bottom, isn't it? Right, let's move on to the made to measure then. I don't know much about this. It's called a two-piece, a cord.
A coordinated top and bottom, They wanted a matching ensemble, a matching two-piece ensemble.
If you were to do a matching garment, what would you perhaps go for?
So, and you get to practice, right?
You do,
and
yes.
You get to
get a week.
Yes, but it has to be for summer.
Yeah.
So indeed. I think it's probably a relaxed outfit, comfortable, and not too hot on the skin. So I would probably do something like that. For me, maybe a sleeveless top and a nice comfortable trouser. I'd probably go along those same lines. Yeah,
and I think we saw a lot of that from some of them. Jill, that was almost a classic one. She wanted something just where she felt comfortable in, and had that top that wasn't too short, not too revealing. And I think the judges said they'd like to see, this was their brief, they'd like to see something chic or summery. And then I think Esme said something about imagination and good use of fabric. So it was going to be interesting to see how they coped with this and what they did. And as you said, they have got time to practice. Though I think Richie let that one out the bag, didn't he?
He didn't. Well, he did something very clever with his at the end, didn't he? Because the top wasn't right, and I think he changed a pleated trouser to.
Was it gathers on the harem pants?
Yes.
Did he go from gathers to pleats or pleats to gathers?
Pleats together, I believe.
Yeah.
I think. I think that was beautifully modeled as well. There's a bit of theatre with that.
We were quite gutted that he went, because we last season we had at the end of each episode, when with the further we got down, we had this thing called the greatest save, didn't we? The biggest save of the week.
Yes.
And actually we went, that was a good save, really. How he ran out of time, he recognised he hadn't practiced and things weren't going to work. He adapted well and saved that well, didn't he?
That fit that bill of the greatest save. It was perfectly done. And he was thinking on his feet, and he had such a calm way, like, this is going to be a disaster. Oh well, let's carry on. He didn't seem to get too flustered, and he did handle that very well. But in that challenge, someone else came out tops. Someone else saved their place in the competition, didn't they, Steve?
Came through, and that was certainly Steve, because he was the one that we thought was going to go out, because he came bottom on the first and second round. Yeah, that was right. Yes, bottom. So he had to pull something out. We already know from previous seasons that the made to measure, although we don't actually know it, but technically it seems to hold a stronger weighting, doesn't it?
Yes.
So if you pull out a good made to measure, you could possibly stay. So Steve had to do something pretty spectacular. He certainly did something more spectacular than Richie, didn't he? With that Bermuda tropical shirt.
I think both chaps got that facing, that contrast facing. They just didn't press it far enough to the underside. But that's an easy thing to get wrong, because you think, oh, it's the facing, so that doesn't take precedent. Okay, so I need to concentrate on the right side of the fabric. And that's where you can mess things up, because actually it's the facing that takes precedent. It's the facing that when it's turned, it's prominent. So it's the main fabric that has to be pressed to one side. And I think that, because they both pressed it beautifully, it was just to the wrong side, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Both of the chaps, there was just that slight bead of the main fabric.
Yeah.
It happens easily. Yeah.
What do you think of Magny's the bustier? There was some skills in that, wasn't there?
Well, that was the winner for me, because the degree of difficulty was that much higher. It was matching. It filled every brief. It was chic. It was summery. And I think she went out a little bit on a technical limb there, and it paid off. It was beautifully done. So she should have been rewarded for that, I thought.
Well, we'll reward her here, won't we? from you, from that. You couldn't get any more better. That's terrible English.
Or betterer.
Yes. Is that who you thought garment of the week would have been for you? That you would have gone for Magny's bustier, would you?
Most definitely. Yeah.
It was a nice episode. High standards there.
I think Marnie is one to watch now, because she's and she's also I love her humor, and she's so at ease in the process.
Yes.
And I think as she relaxes into it, I think we're going to see some things that are quite special from her.
Thank you, Carol, as always. Lovely hearing your insights. And then
Thank you very much.
You're welcome, learning all those new techniques about shearing. Let us know if you're going to do some shearing, whether you've been inspired to do that dress. I'm still doing the wrap dress. Me and Carol have been talking about the wrap dress and how to deal with the front and using the stay tape. So stay tuned. More on that to come over the coming weeks. Otherwise, we will see you next week for week 4 of All Gathered Up from the Sewing Bee. See you, everyone.
See you next week.
Indeed, another week. Bye.